Hello friends, this is Fahad from Game Code Bytes. In this presentation, we're going to learn how to build a smoke particle system with JavaScript, just like the one you see in this demo. I'm also going to use the Clouds Platformer game or the Clouds Platformer game engine we built before to showcase the particle system. You can always build this system separately from the Clouds Platformer, but it will be also nice to showcase what kind of platforms we can use this particle system with. Again, I'm going to use the Clouds Platformer example we built in the previous video. And all what I did here is that I duplicated that folder called Clouds Platformer and I renamed it to Clouds Platformer with Particles. And this is how we built the engine and gave it a good level of abstraction. We can create a playground easily by saying game.init and give it the width, height, and the color. And then we would add the hero at some position with its image source. And also we add a bunch of clouds on the playground so that the hero can interact with those clouds by standing on them. And then once we're done, we can just say game.start. That is the level of abstraction we have in this engine. Now let's go back to the game.js, which is the file that holds the logic for the game engine. And since we're dealing with particle system, we definitely need to store those particles in some sort of a data structure. And I would just say, let's create an array of particles. You can call it smoke particles or whatever you want. I'm also going to need to create a random function so that I can pass a min and max values, and then that function will return a random value between the min and max I provided. So here I'll say random equals min max, then math.random multiplied by max minus min plus min. Now let's create a function that generates a bunch of particles. So here I'll say create particles, and I'm going to pass a number of particles. And then I'm going to loop through that number. I need to create a size constant here, and you'll see that in a second. Why do I have to put it here? And I'm going to use a random value for this size from, for example, 5 to 10, 5 minimum and max 10. Then we need to push into the particles array. Give it a value of x0 and y is 0. And width is going to be the size, and height is going to be the size I declared here, because I want the shape to be square. I need alpha to keep track of the opacity of the particle. I'll just put it to 1. And alpha decrease value is going to be a random 1 to 0.07. And this is literally going to be the number we will be decreasing the alpha with. And the speed is going to be minus random from 1 to 5. And why I'm using minus here, because the particles will be moving to the top, towards the top of the canvas, from the head of the hero towards the top. So we need minus value. And you can do it a different way, it doesn't matter. I'm also going to use a velocity. It's not going to be like a real velocity. You'll see it. And I'm also going to pass, maybe I create an array of colors, but for now let's just use this value, which is almost black. Now we can start creating, or maybe just call the Createparticles function in the init of the engine, which is literally the entry point to the engine, where you start the engine at first. So I'll say create particles, and let's say 100. Now if we run it, let's just make sure we don't have errors or something, and we don't. You're not going to see anything because we are not rendering the particles yet. Now let's render the particles. So we need to go back to the render function, and then maybe here we'll say particles dot for each, let's say p particles, and we need to say render quad p.x, p.y, p.width, and p.height. And we also need the color. Okay. We now see some particles here, but we can't see all of the particles because all of the particles positions are on 0, 0. I'm going to do a small, tiny refactoring here by removing the velocity vector from the particles, because all what we need is to move the particles towards the top of the canvas using the speed value, which is going to be minus value from 1 to 5. Now let's animate the particles. So I'll go to the update function, and maybe here I'll loop through all of the particles, and I'm also going to use for each. So particles.for each p, and then I'll say p.y plus equal p.speed to move the particles towards the top of the canvas. And also I need to decrease the alpha using the randomized value we generated in each of those particles. So alpha decrease, and then here I'm going to check if p.alpha is less than 0. That means I need to reposition that particle and also set its alpha again to 1, and p.alpha decrease equal random, because on every time we reset this value or reset the particle, we want to decrease a randomized value from the alpha. And then p.x, it's gonna be randomized from here, from the start position on the x-axis of the hero until the x-axis plus the width of the hero minus the width of the particle. So I'll add the logic here by saying random hero.x and then hero.x plus hero.width minus the particle width itself. And then p.speed equals random from 1 to 4 or whatever, to 5 or 4, whatever. Let's test this out and see. And it's not working. Let's see if we have an error or something. Okay, nothing. And it makes sense why it's not working, because we did not reset the position on the y-axis as well. And it's going to be the hero y, which is going to be the top of the head of the hero. And maybe you can just use a slight small number to reposition it, like at the top of the hero's head, but also minus some value. So let's use 3, for example. Okay, now it's working perfectly. Now the particle system is working, but there's something is not right, which is the fact that the opacity or the alpha of those particles are not decreasing, just like how we wanted to. And that's because I'm using the render quad function, and this render quad function is not considering the opacity or the alpha. So we need to pass the alpha value here, but we also need to set set it to 1 as default value, because at some other places we're not changing the opacity. So we don't have to worry about that. Now here, we need to say context.global alpha equals the alpha we just passed. But also, where we are rendering those particles, we need to pass the alpha value. And it's going to be p.alpha. Let's test it out. And it's working. Now I can just remove that stroke value, or rendering with stroke, to remove those borders from the particles. So if we go to render quad function, if I take this stroke style, or actually not the stroke style, the stroke rect, it is more convenient now. But let's add more particles to showcase what I'm saying. Let's use 500, for example. And it's more like a smoke now. But also, we are missing another thing, and I'll talk about it in a second. Now let's pass another value to the render quad here and set it to true. And that value is going to be with stroke, and it is going to equals true as the default value. And here we'll say if with stroke, then render that stroke rect to have the effect, or not the effect, but the drawing of the borders on those shapes. Now, by default, it's going to be true, but when we render the particles, we can just remove that, or maybe just, pass false. Render quad for the particles, and I'm just going to pass false here. So now we have the borders on the other shapes except the particles, and this is exactly what we want. Now I also want to use more than one color, not only black color here, but instead dark black and then lighter black, lighter, lighter, until you get something more grayish, so that these smoke shapes will be more convenient. And to do that, I'm going to use this colors array, which I just created behind the scene. And then I'm going to push some values to that colors array. So I'll loop through, let's say 9, and I'll explain what I'm doing here. So the RGB color is constructed this way: hash or pound symbol, and then 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 to give the black color. What we want is that we push values like this, from 0, all of them zeros, and then all of them 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s, and get more of a black color, but lighter and lighter and lighter. And to do that, I'll say colors.push, and then I'll have the symbol, the pound symbol, and then I also am going to use a double quotation so that the what is coming here is not going to be considered as a integer value. Now if we console log the colors array, we should see values from 0, 0, 0, 0 until 8, 8, 8, 8, like this. And this is exactly what we want. And let's maybe use less than or equal so that we have until 9. Good. Let's remove the console log. Now I need to start using those colors with the particles instead of this static color. So I'll say colors array, and I'm going to use a random from 0 to colors.length. But if I run this, it's not going to work, because the random function is going to give, it's not going to give a whole integer value. It's going to give a decimal value as well. So I can just say parse int this value to convert it to an integer. And let's run it and see what's going to happen. And it's working. Let me change the size, the minimum size of those particles. So maybe start from 10 till 15. Let's try this number. Nice. I like this one. Now the particle system is working. Everything's perfect, but we also want to give the option for the consumer of the engine to decide if she wants to use the particle system. And to do that, instead of creating this in the init function, I'm going to remove this from here and expose a function in the engine. And that function will be, I'm just going to call it enable particles. I'm going to pass a number of particles, and then here I will call the Createparticles function, and I'm going to pass the n value. Now I'll run it, and there are no particles anymore because the default is that it's not going to call this function, right? And to do that, we need to explicitly say game.enable particles, and then I will pass the number of particles required. Let's go crazy with 500 or maybe 1000. And it's perfect. All right, this is going to be the end of the smoke particle system with JavaScript, specifically with the Clouds platformer engine we built before. If you liked it, if you find it useful, subscribe to my channel. Other than that, stay tuned for the next video. Thank you guys for watching. This is Fahad from Game Code Bytes.